I think that there isn't really a best player in the league anymore, and I think that the league in some ways is better for it.
I hear you. I think that Jokic is the. I think if I had to pick a best player this year who's had the best season, I think it's Jokic. I think he's definitively having the best season, but I think that I wouldn't go as far as to say he is the best player unanimously. I think that there's an argument to be made for a bunch of different guys. But I think that also speaks to the level of talent in the league. I think that this is the most talent that we've ever had in the league.
Let me put you on game.
Let's talk about the state of the league at large. I think over the last decade or so, or even if you want to go back to probably the early 80s, I think we've always had a definitive best player or a definitive like best 2 to 3 players in the league. But I think we're at a place right now where there is no unanimous quote unquote GOAT right now because of the state of the league. At least that's my opinion. But what do you think about the state of the league and the idea that there is or isn't a best player?
I think that it's a bit of a misnomer because Jordan really brought in that narrative of best player because he was so overwhelmingly dominant, and because the league really just benefited from that narrative, and he was such a singular, iconic juggernaut of a brand. The league just transformed into this best player kind of thing that isn't as prominent in other leagues. Like I even look at NFL, and you think that a lot of people say, oh, Patrick Mahomes or Tom Brady as the best player. Tom Brady maybe is the best of all time, but not necessarily the best player. Patrick Mahomes as the best quarterback, but then you have an Aaron Donald who's a defensive tackle that's a lot of people consider to be the actual best player. And so there's so much. It's so up for debate. And I think for the longest, you had the Jordan era that kind of benefited from that narrative again. And then miraculously, we got LeBron, who for the last 19 years has been a quote unquote best player. But then more recently, because of his just being human and slowing down, you literally can't call him the best player anymore because he just doesn't bring it night in and night out, even though he's one of the best players. And then you look at guys like Giannis, who got Defensive Player of the Year and MVP, Finals MVP, and is coming off a championship here, but still there being question marks because he's one toe away from not actually have winning anything that year. It's a really fascinating question to ask, and I just don't think that there is a definitive best player. You have moments, and I think that this year the playoffs are going to be defined by players in their respective moments and whether or not they can rise to the occasion. But it would be tough for me to say any one particular player in this group of players is the best, especially when you look at advanced statistics. I found this really interesting Reddit post about the 4 major impact metrics all have the same top 5 players. And these metrics are effective, plus minus, LeBron wins, Raptor wins, and the real plus minus stats. And they're led by Jokic, Curry, Giannis, Tatum, and Embiid. And you hear all those 5 names, and it's funny how kind of Tatum is just sprinkled in there. But Tatum is having an amazing season, and he's playing really well as of right now. He also benefits from just leading the league or being, I think, one of the top 3 players in the league in terms of minutes. And all of these players have some kind of case to be made of being a top 10, top 5 guy that you could build a franchise around. But can you actually say throughout a regular season or a playoff that any one of these guys is the definitive best in the league? Not really. If you're going to be honest, can you say that about KD? Maybe, but he can't stay healthy enough for us to really have that reliability Iron Man factor that you want in your best player in the league. And then when you look at LeBron, he just doesn't bring it night in and night out on the defensive end, and he does take plays off. And he's just probably better suited to not play at that highest level because he's more likely to be injured and then have to miss games. So I think that there isn't really a best player in the league anymore. And I think that the league in some ways is better for it.
I hear you. I think that Jokic is the. I think if I had to pick a best player this year who's had the best season, I think it's Jokic. I think he's definitively having the best season, but I think that I wouldn't go as far as to say he is the best player unanimously. I think that there's an argument to be made for a bunch of different guys. But I think that also speaks to the level of talent in the league. I think that this is the most talent that we've ever had in the league. Even if you want to look at a guy like Karl Anthony Towns, like, yes, he's an all-star, but he plays for the Timberwolves, but he's one of the most talented big men we've ever seen. But it's just like, he's like 15th or lower in terms of like best players in the league, in terms of if you were to rank guys, you know what I'm saying? But if you were to stick him in like 2001, he probably moves up the ranking some because of there's not necessarily that as much talent. Like, when I think about best player in the league, I think this time and this year is unique because there's an argument for more guys than ever. I think if you want to look at the 90s, outside of his baseball retirement, it was unequivocally Michael Jordan. Statistically, eye test, game to game, whatever you want to call it, it's Mike. 80s, probably the start of the 80s is probably a guy like Kareem. But mid 80s, late 80s, it's Larry versus Magic. And then if you want to look at the early 2000s, it's probably Shaq. Late 2000s or mid 2000s, it's probably Kobe or Tim Duncan. And then you have the era of Bron for the next 12 years. But it's always been like a one or two guy race for the most part in terms of best player. But since the last couple of years, yeah, it's at least you can make an argument for any one of like five guys. And I think that's really intriguing. Because that also brings up another argument, which is who's the face of the league. And I think you see it on ESPN all the time. We've seen it with guys like Kendrick Perkins saying Giannis can't be the face of the league, which doesn't make sense considering, you know, he has one of the better like personalities. He's incredibly sellable. His shoes sell, all of that stuff that counts in terms of face of the league. But yeah, I think there's just been this notion that there needs to be a face of the league, but realistically, like we said, there isn't. I think, like I said, Jokic is having the best season. I don't think guys are going to look at him to be the face of the league. I don't think he cares about being the face of the league at all.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we're in a position now where the face of the league is different for whoever you decide to ask, whether you're talking about someone from the South or the North or the West Coast, or if you want to go international, because basketball more now than ever is an international game. So yeah, I think we're in a place right now where the wealth is kind of spread around as far as best players. Ja Morant, his team is second in the West right now. He's having an explosive season. Jason Tatum, like we mentioned earlier, is having an incredible run for the best team in the NBA since the start of the new year. DeMar DeRozan is having his best season at age, 32? And he's probably the best fourth quarter player in the league right now. So it's like there's lots of guys that in most other eras or most other time would have been the best player in the league. But right now, because of the dearth of talent, it's really hard to say if there's a best player or if there's a face.
Yeah. And a lot of teams just have benefited from better team basketball overall. Guys just being super talented, a lot of guys being able to space the floor and there just being a style of basketball where no one particular style seems to be absolutely dominant. For the longest, they said that everybody was moving towards the James Harden, Luka style, take control of the game, shoot a bunch of threes, have this guy dominate the ball. And so you see a guy drafted like Cade Cunningham who kind of fits that mold, but that's not the definitive go-to anymore, because then you have a guy like Jason Tatum who on the wings can be a facilitator in the same, just like DeMar DeRozan. So you have that kind of mode as well, and that's playing well. Then you have this big man, Joel and Joker, where they all play the big man role slightly differently, but they're all extremely effective at it. And so then you just have the freak of nature in Ja Morant, who has the fastest first step that I've seen in a while and can get to the paint at will and finish over anybody in the league. So there's so many different ways to win. There's so many different styles, and there's a brand of basketball that if you're a fan of from a certain era, you can find it. If you, old school, back to the basket, go to Joel. If you like, to see a big man play like Sabonis did in the late 90s on that Portland Trailblazers team, you go to Joker. You want to see somebody just bring a 7-footer, bring the ball up from from inbounds and go coast to coast and dunk over everybody. You see Giannis. And if you want to see a big man, a little man highlight reel, watch Ja. So it's I love the league right now. And you can almost take for granted how awesome it is to watch.
For sure. You can even look at all-star teams as evidence for the level of talent in the league and how much that's changed. Like Roy Hibbert was an all-star in the early 2010s, just because they didn't have enough, like they didn't have enough centers to fill the position, because center was a position at the all-star game a while ago. Nothing against Roy Hibbert, because he was a good NBA player, but it's just that's kind of like the level of talent that we had at the center spot. So we did away with it. Now we have forward and guard, or however you want to slice it up. But we could do a center position now, because there's so many, like a lot of the really great players in the league right now are centers. And that has changed a lot, because back then it was kind of like Dwight Howard or no one, you know what I mean? But now we're seeing so many big guys flourishing in their roles. Like Giannis could just be a center. He's a forward, but you know what I'm saying? Like he's in that mold. And then you have, of course, we have guys like Jokic and Embiid and Karl Anthony Towns and all of these guys that are incredibly talented. And that's just one position. You know, you go down the line and there's a dearth of talent at every single position. And then you've got the influx of talent right now. Like this is one of the best rookie classes that we've seen in a while, between Cade, between Evan Mobley, you know, Scotty Barnes, Josh Giddey, like guys like there's just such a level of talent. And then you've got guys coming next year. You got Chet Holmgren and Paolo Banchero and Jabari Smith coming in from the college game. It's just a great time to be a basketball fan. And I think we kind of get into these really simplified conversations about who's the best player, or who's the face, or who's this, who's that, when realistically, like, it's just pick your poison. You know, there's just that many guys that are playing so many different brands of basketball. You know, there's like you said, there's guys playing all these different styles. The mid-range was dead, but now we've got KD and DeMar DeRozan killing guys from there because teams are giving them that shot. And you've got just a bevy of different styles of play. But yeah, it's a really enjoyable time to be a basketball fan, just from that perspective, but also the playoffs this year. So there's a lot to be excited about in the NBA, and I'm amped. I'm ready to go.
Yeah, man. Can't wait. Got a month to go. Let's get it.
Let's get it.